Janavallabha Girivare Hari Gopi Janavallabha Girivare Nandana Vraja Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Jayom Vishnupad Paramahansa Paravajakacharya Saraswati Srimad Savangri Sri Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Sri Rupa Prabhupada Ki Jayom Vishnupad Paramahansa Paravajakacharya Saraswati Srimad Savangri Sri Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Ananta Kota Vaishnavrinda Ki ISKCON founder Acharyas Divine Grace Sri Prabhupada Ki Namacharya Shri Haridas Thakur Ki Premseka Ho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gauda Bhaktivinoda Ki Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopanath Shama Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Shri Navadip Mayapur Dham Ki Ganga Mayi Ki Yamuna Mayi Ki Tulsi Devi Ki Bhakti Devi Ki Sankirtan Yagya Ki Shri Harinam Sankirtan Ki Shri Shri Radha Shyama Sundar Ki Shri Govardhan Lal Ki Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda Ki Gopemananda. Glorious to the assembled devotees, all glorious to the assembled devotees, all glorious to the assembled devotees, all glorious to Shri Shri Guru and Gauranga. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pachalini Niyavishesha Shanyavari Pastacharya Sataran. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. I'm going to read from Srimad Bhagavatam, first canto, chapter 5, text number 11. It's a long purport, I may just be part of it. Before I begin speaking, I want to make sure that I understand the event which you're all conducting today. I want to make sure I've understood it correctly. You're commemorating your experiences from the month of December from your Sankirtana marathon. Is that correct? Correct. Okay. I just wanted to make sure. I don't say something irrelevant. I picked this verse because it's about distribution of transcendental literature. And I thought I would also speak about the first Srila Prabhupada marathon. Well, actually, the first Srila Prabhupada marathon was in 1972. I was visiting the temple during 1972, but in the East Coast, there was really no marathon because nobody really knew about it yet. The December marathon was a spontaneous marathon that took place in 1972 on the west coast of the United States, where actually the BPT wasn't there yet. The BPT was still in New York. And for a description of the 1972 marathon, devotees can and probably have already read about it in Srila Prabhupada Lila Rita. But because it was because of that marathon that spontaneously combusted, spontaneous combustion on the West Coast. By 1973, he had already hit the East Coast, and we had a responsibility to imitate it. But I'll try to speak about the setting and my experience from participating in that event. But first, let's read about this verse from the Srimad Bhagavatam, and which Srila Prabhupada speaks very clearly about the necessary distribution of transcendental literature for the upliftment and enlightenment of human society. And I will also speak about how this verse and commentary was very relevant to me because I was exposed to it before I moved into the temple. The only books that were available when I first joined were Bhagavad Gita and first canto, first volume of Srimad Bhagavatam, and Krishna book. Okay. So the verse, I should just read it myself. Right? Okay. Very good. Thank you. Tat Vak Visaga Janata Agha Viplava Yasmin Pratishlokam Habadavati Api Namani Anantasya Yasha Ankitani Yat Shinvanti Gayanti Grinanti Sadhava Tadvag Visago Janataga Viplavo Yasmin Pratishlokam Abadhavatyapi Namanyanant Namanyanantasya yashon kitaniyat. Shinvanti gayanti grananti sadhava. Tadbhagvisago janataga viplavo. Yasmin pratishlokam abhadavatyapi. Namanyanantasya yashon kitaniyat. Shinvanti gayanti grananta sadhava. Tadbhagvisago janataga viplavo. Yasmin pratishlokam abhadavatyapi. Namanyanantasya yashon kitaniyat. Shinvanti gayanti grananti sadhava. Anybody chant? Tat. Should I read? Oh, just a little.
We have a few devotees who doesn't speak Hungarian.
Huh?
We have a few devotees.
Oh, a few that don't speak Hungarian. Okay. That. Vak. Vocabulary. Visarga. Creation. Janata. The people in general. Agha. Sins. Viplava. Revolutionary. Yasmin. In which. Pratishlokam. Each and every stanza. Abhidavati. Irregularly composed. Api. In spite of. Namani. Transcendental names, etc. Anantasya. Of the unlimited Lord. Yasha. Glories. Ankitani. Depicted. Yat. What? Shinvanti. Do hear. Gayanti. Do sing. Grinanti. Do accept. Sadhava. The purified men who are honest. Translation. On the other hand, that literature which is full of descriptions of the transcendental glories, of the name, fame, forms, pastimes, etc., of the unlimited Supreme Lord, is a different creation, full of transcendental words directed toward bringing about a revolution in the impious lives of the world's misdirected civilization. Such transcendental literatures, even though imperfectly composed, are heard, sung, and accepted by purified men who are thoroughly honest. Before I begin reading the purport, should I ask what the schedule is, Sripati?
Hogy addig hallgatjuk, hogy beszél, ameddig csak...
I forgot. What is the schedule, Shanti?
Both of them said, we are listening to you as long as you speak. That's the schedule.
Okay. Well, how long should I speak?
As long as you feel comfortable to do so.
Is there anybody else supposed to speak?
No.
Maybe.
Okay, that gives me a little bit idea. Then maybe we should read the whole purport. Well, let me see. Yeah, I could ask you to read the whole thing in Hungarian, but then some people don't understand. Okay, so I'll just start. Purport. It is a qualification of the great thinkers to pick up the best even from the worst. It is said that the intelligent man should pick up nectar from a stalk of poison, should accept gold even from a filthy place, should accept a good and qualified wife even from an obscure family, and should accept a good lesson even from a man or from a teacher who comes from the untouchables. These are some of the ethical instructions for everyone in every place without exception. But a saint is far above the level of an ordinary man. He is always absorbed in glorifying the Supreme Lord, because by broadcasting the holy name and fame of the Supreme Lord, the polluted atmosphere of the world will change, and as a result of propagating the transcendental literatures like Srimad Bhagavatam, people will become sane in their transactions. While preparing this commentation on this particular stanza of Srimad Bhagavatam, we have a crisis before us. Our neighboring friend China has attacked the border of India with a militaristic spirit. We have practically no business in the political field, yet we see that previously there were both China and India, and they both lived peacefully for centuries without ill feeling. The reason is that they lived those days in an atmosphere of God consciousness, and every country over the surface of the world was God-fearing, pure-hearted, and simple, and there was no question of political diplomacy. There is no cause of quarrel between the two countries, China and India, over land which is not very suitable for habitation. And certainly, there is no cause for fighting on this issue. But due to the age of quarrel, Kali, which we have discussed, there is always a chance of quarrel on slight provocation. This is due not to the issue in question, but to the polluted atmosphere of this age. Systematically, there is propaganda by a section of people to stop glorification of the name and fame of the Supreme Lord. Therefore, there is a great need for disseminating the message of Srimad Bhagavatam all over the world. It is the duty of every responsible Indian to broadcast the transcendental message of Srimad Bhagavatam throughout the world, to do all the supermost good, as well as to bring about the desired peace in the world. Because India has failed in her duty by neglecting this responsible work, there is so much quarrel and trouble all over the world. We are confident that if the transcendental message of Srimad Bhagavatam is received only by the leading men of the world, certainly there will be a change of heart, and naturally the people in general will follow them. The mass of people in general are tools in the hands of the modern politicians and leaders of the people. If there is a change of heart of the leaders only, certainly there will be a radical change in the atmosphere of the world. We know that our honest attempt to present this great literature, conveying transcendental messages for reviving the God consciousness of the people in general, and re-spiritualizing the world atmosphere, is fraught with many difficulties. Presenting this matter is adequate language, especially a foreign language, will certainly fail, and there will be so many literary discrepancies despite our honest attempt to present it in the proper way. But we are sure that with all our faults in this connection, the seriousness of the subject matter will be taken into consideration, and the leaders of society will still accept this due to its being an honest attempt to glorify the Almighty Lord. When there is fire in a house, the inmates of the house go out to help from the neighbors, go out to get help from the neighbors, who may be foreigners, and yet without knowing the language, the victims of the fire express themselves, and the neighbors understand the need, even though not expressed in the same language. The same spirit of cooperation is needed to broadcast this transcendental message of the Srimad Bhagavatam throughout the polluted atmosphere of the world. After all, it is a technical science of spiritual values, and thus we are concerned with the techniques and not with the language. If the techniques of this great literature are understood by the people of the world, there will be success. When there are too many materialistic activities by the people in general, all over the world, there is no wonder that a person or a nation attacks another person or nation on slight provocation. That is the rule of this age of Kali or quarrel. The atmosphere is already polluted with corruption of all description, and everyone knows it well. Papa's so right on. I can't believe I'm reading this purport. Anyways, there are so many unwanted literatures full of materialistic ideas of sense gratification. In many countries, there are bodies appointed by the state to detect and censor obscene literature. This means that neither the government nor the responsible leaders of the public want such literature, yet it is in the marketplace because the people want it for sense gratification. The people in general want to read. That is a natural instinct. But because their minds are polluted, they want such literatures. Under the circumstances, transcendental literatures like Srimad Bhagavatam will not only diminish the activities of the corrupt mind of the people in general, but also it will supply food for their hankering after reading some interesting literature. In the beginning, they may not like it because one suffering from jaundice is reluctant to take sugar candy. But we should know that sugar candy is the only remedy for jaundice. Similarly, let there be systematic propaganda for popularizing reading of the Bhagavad Gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam, which will act like sugar candy for the jaundice-like condition of sense gratification. When men have a taste for this literature, the other literatures which are catering poison to society will then automatically cease. We are sure, therefore, that everyone in human society will welcome Srimad Bhagavatam, even though it is now presented with so many faults, for it is recommended by Sri Narada, who has very kindly appeared in this chapter. Om Agyana Timirandasya Garanjana Sarakaya Chakshu Unmeditam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Mukam Paroti Vachalam Angam Mangayate Guri Yat Kripa Tamaham Mande Shri Gurum Dinataranam Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharine Nirvishesha Shanyavadi Paschachade Shatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare Hare. I didn't read this before I came. I just looked at the verse and saw that it was a large purport. But as I'm reading it now, I'm overwhelmed. And that's what was happening to me as I was reading this commentary. I was remembering the spirit that when I first became introduced to the Krishna consciousness movement in 1972, that devotees had. And from reading this purport, it's obvious where this spirit came from. It was Prabhupada, as I said, at least at the time when I joined, there were not many books. Bhagavad Gita, as it is, had been published, the big version, the Macmillan version, was published in 1972. And also was first canto, first volume of Srimad Bhagavatam. It was published right around the time that I joined. And Teachings of Lord Chaitanya. These were the books that were published, I won't say in mass, but there were large publications of them, publishings of them. Books for major distribution started to become published around 1972, 73, especially because of what happened in 1972, the explosion of distribution. But Srila Prabhupada, he wrote his commentaries to Bhagavad Gita even before coming to America, with the understanding that these commentaries that he was writing were going to be introduced to the Western civilization. And because he was a great thinker, he understood what was happening in the Western civilization. And because he was a great thinker, and we can see from this commentary, he was already observing what was happening in the Indian civilization. He was, as he spoke about right in this commentary, India is failing the world because we have what the world doesn't have, and we're not doing anything about it. Instead, we have already begun to emulate what they have in the Western world, becoming preoccupied in not only emulating it, but trying to achieve it. And therefore, although we have the greatest wealth here in India, which is this transcendental knowledge, the wisdom of the Vedas, we are failing because nobody is even taking it up seriously here in India. And when I say seriously, we understand in the mood of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Yes, there were Vedic scholars, there were studies of Vedic literature, there was some culture, spiritual culture. Certainly remnants of that were still existing during Prabhupada's time. But what we know, the spark that ignited in Srila Prabhupada's heart the mission of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came from his Guru Maharaj, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. And as we know, Prabhupada would sometimes speak about that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur knew that it was very important to bring this wisdom, transcendental knowledge to the Western world, because he attempted to send some of his disciples there before Prabhupada. And Prabhupada would sometimes say about how they had gone to England and he had gone to the West, specifically gone to England, but they didn't really capture the essence and mood of their spiritual master. And he thought it would be better to adapt to the Western culture first so that it can be accepted. And then Prabhupada, of course, sometimes spoke, but in a way that was respectful. But essentially, he really didn't, he acknowledged that they failed in creating that explosion of Krishna consciousness in the West, which was the hope and desire of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and which was revealed by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur to Srila Prabhupada in his first meeting. We know the history, we know what Prabhupada heard from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur in their first meeting. And we know how Prabhupada accepted those words in his heart. I remember reading, it was a book compiled by a god sister of mine, Mula Prakriti Devi Dasi. And she had compiled, she had interviewed everyone who had met Prabhupada before Prabhupada went to the West. I think the book was called Srila Prabhupada, a friend to all, a friend of all. Yes? Trying to remember the name of the god brother. He was a god, Nayanananda. He was a brahmachari who was a pujari in Mayapur at the temple. I remember meeting him. We went there in 1976 to that temple, and he had been a pujari there and a brahmachari for decades, because it was the instruction that was given to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta to him. He was Prabhupada's godbrother, to worship those deities. And in that interview by Mula Prakriti Devi Dasi, this Vaishnava, you could see that among many of the historical accounts which were given by devotees who met Srila Prabhupada, in my mind, this one stood out practically the most. And I will explain why. I mean, sometimes many devotees who were interviewed, they had so many wonderful things to say about Prabhupada. I personally relished reading that book. Some things I read, I took with a grain of salt. His expression, you take with a grain of salt? What does it mean? Take with a grain of salt. It's an English expression. Huh? Take it with a grain of salt means you take it, but you can't really put everything into it. There's some doubt. There's some doubt, and you want to be sure. There's other substantial evidence to back up the statement of this person. So in English, you take the expressions, you take it with a grain of salt. See, it is, I don't know where it came from. But so some of the things I took very dearly, and I really appreciate it, but some I took with a grain of salt. Because these people who are speaking, they also know how successful Srila Prabhupada was. They also knew how Prabhupada was not only successful, but he had followers throughout the whole world. And his success was not only in his followers, but he established so many temples all over the world. And to establish so many temples around the world, some people thought, well, he was successful because previously he was a good businessman. Of course, you hear certain things and you take it with a grain of salt. But I could go into detail. I mean, it's subjective what I'm describing right now. But having seen Prabhupada, having heard Prabhupada, having my association with Prabhupada was me having been weaned in Krishna consciousness on these books, and having come to Krishna consciousness in the midst of the spirit that Prabhupada had created, and having heard from so many of those devotees who were intimately associated with Prabhupada, directly hearing from them, I looked through, when I was reading some of these glorifications, I looked through it with that lens. But when I read this glorification of Prabhupada from this godbrother, it really went into my heart. And I was thinking, here's somebody who's not simply trying to, what's the word I'm looking for? To win a following. Here's somebody who really loved Prabhupada and appreciated Prabhupada for what he had done and understood why it happened. Whew, that was a long introduction, wasn't it? I wanted to be careful because I know sometimes things could be taken in the wrong context. And I just wanted to make sure that my words were not taken in the wrong context. I have so much adoration and appreciation, and was always very careful in my dealings and acceptance internally of Prabhupada's godbrothers and representatives of Prabhupada's of the Gaudiya Math, which Prabhupada himself also, although he said some things about Gaudiya Math, his experience with Gaudiya Math in the early days was, he was thinking they were some of his godbrothers. When he met them in Ahmedabad, he thinking they're representatives of my spiritual master, and they're coming from the spiritual world, and I must serve them in a system. And these were Prabhupada's own words. So he said one thing in one place, and he may have said something else in another place. And like Prabhupada said here, we have to be intelligent how to accept the essence. Why did Prabhupada sometimes speak the way he spoke? And why did Prabhupada at another time speak in a way of so highly of his godbrothers? And sometimes he had to protect the faith of very neophyte devotees. And he apologized personally to many of those. Forgive me. When many of his godbrothers, you read Srila Prabhupada's pastimes in Vrindavan, Harisari's Prabhu's diary, what is it? Back to Vrindavan, when Prabhupada was meeting with all of these godbrothers. And he would say to them, please forgive me. Sometimes I may have said something that may have been inappropriate. But he was protecting faith. He was preaching a worldwide movement. And personally, I saw who he was dealing with. Because I was one of them. I was one of them. And I could understand that Prabhupada was protecting such our fledgling faith in adopting a Krishna consciousness. If I keep on going on this, I might never get to the 1973 Prabhupada Marathon. But it's important. It's important. So I'll finish that topic, and I'll move into the statements of Prabhupada's godbrother, which really went into my heart. He was telling a story how Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur had organized a parikram in Mayapur, and many of the leaders were present at that place, at this particular place where he was the pujari. And he was talking about that present at that time, because it was a very large parikram that was organized, where many of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's sannyasis carrying their dandas. And it was a large number of his followers. And I can't remember the exact words, I have a Kali Yuga memory. But I will try to paraphrase what was said and the way it was said. He described how Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was giving a lecture to everyone present at the time. And he was speaking about the importance of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's message. And he was looking to everybody and speaking about, this devotee was carefully looking at his eyes as he was speaking. And he was watching how he was emphasizing the importance of this message that needed to be broadcast all over the world. And Prabhupada was there at the time. He was in his household Vesh, because Prabhupada wanted to join, to take part of the Parakam, because Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was speaking, and he was always eager to hear him speak. And this devotee explained how that when Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur came to the importance of Mahaprabhu's message and the importance of how it must be spread all over the world, he said that although all these big sannyasis, dandas and saffron, were sitting in front of him, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was looking off at the distance and looking right at Prabhupada. And he said he was specifically watching his eyes and his movement, noticing that he wasn't looking at the big sannyasis, but he was looking at Abhay Babu. Because Srila Bhaktisiddhanta knew that Srila Prabhupada understood, had captured the spirit, and would bring Mahaprabhu's message to the West. He knew his heart. He knew the fire that had been ignited in his heart. He saw the fire that was ignited in his heart right from the moment of their first meeting. He saw the potential. That's actually one of the responsibilities of a preacher of Krishna consciousness. A preacher is effective when he understands what is the potential in the heart of his audience. And when he understands the potential in the heart of his audience, he delivers a message to the audience that will be heard. He knows he knows who immediately drift off. And he knows who's listening attentively. He can tell from the look on their face, from the eyes. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, and I had this experience once with Prabhupada. I was, and I don't want to drift. But in 1975, I'll make it short. In 1975, I was visiting Philadelphia because Prabhupada was there. And Prabhupada was there for Rath Yatra. Oh, it's a whole story. I won't go there. I won't tell the whole story. I just want to make the point. I was going to Rath Yatra, and for some reason, our whole temple, we all went in one big vehicle. And we all went in the back of a big box truck, standing up. Box truck? It's a truck with a big box behind it. People move furniture in it and things like that. In fact, the person who was the owner of the truck, his name is Bhakti Prabhupada Vraja Damodar Swami now. But he was selling furniture at the time. And he had this big furniture truck. So to go see Prabhupada, he offered to bring the whole temple in the back of the truck. For 300 miles. 300 miles. And everybody had to stand up in the back of the truck. And we put up a rug in the middle of the truck, not in the middle, it was sort of like to the side. Because on one side of the rug was the men, on the other side of the rug was the women. And we had to stand for most of them. But fortunately, for me, I was the only person in the temple who knew how to drive a truck. Besides Bhakta, because I used to work for a company and I drove their truck. So I got to sit in the front of the truck most of the trip. But we to see Prabhupada didn't make it. Everybody was ready to make the sacrifice. So for some reason, when we finally got there after 300 miles from driving Boston to Philadelphia, we were told we had to. There was a place for us to stay, but it was on the other side of the river. So it was quite far from the temple. And because it was quite far from the temple, we didn't make it to class in time when Prabhupada was giving class. So we got there, it was a little bit late, and the temple room was already completely full. And when we got into the hall, it was a hall, and we could see that there was no place to sit down, and we were trying to get in. And Prabhupada, could see Prabhupada was sitting on the Vyasa-san, and the devotee who was next to the door, he didn't want us to disturb Prabhupada, so he closed the door. So we were all standing there, so crestfallen. Our heart, but just everything. My heart, I just couldn't. I was like, why couldn't we get into class? And somehow Prabhupada, I don't know the circumstances. Today, I don't know. I never talked to anybody who was inside the class, but somehow Prabhupada gestured to open the door. So the door opened. And we were thinking, Prabhupada says we can go in. So I started to quickly move in. And I didn't want to just move in. I wanted to move in as close as possible to Prabhupada. And Prabhupada looked up and looked right in my eyes. And I had that experience that Prabhupada, his glance and looking at me, and many devotees testify, when Prabhupada looks at you, then he doesn't see you, but he looks into the eyes and goes right down and knows everything in the heart. Just by that glance, I immediately shrunk down right where I was. I didn't try to go any further. It was Prabhupada saying, "You fool, why did you take birth in the material world?" And I just shrunk down to the floor. And somehow, I don't even remember how I sat. I might have sat on somebody. But the glance. And the point that I was making that an empowered preacher of Krishna consciousness, he knows the heart of his audience. And we understand that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur understood Prabhupada's heart and the potential in Prabhupada's heart from the moment of their first meeting. I mean, he didn't have to say to Prabhupada, "You fool, why did you take, Abhay, you fool, why did you take birth in the material world?" through his glance. Although Prabhupada explained that he felt like a fool. He felt completely defeated by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Because Prabhupada explains how he gave an argument to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. How can we be successful? When we're still not an independent nation. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur ignited an explosion in Prabhupada's heart by saying, no, this message is so important that it transcends all other messages that need to be heard. Prabhupada gave it the analogy here in this purport. He said, when there's a fire in a house, then even though a person may not fully understand the language, he knows how to communicate to the neighbors of what's happening in the house if he wants help. Just like Tota Gopinath, right? A couple of days ago. There wasn't a fire in the house, but there was a snowstorm. And there was a lot of snow on the ground. He had to go, and we were, like, snow was everywhere. He had to go to a store and he had to communicate to the store owner what he needed. So we walked into the store and went. The store owner immediately knew. Because there wasn't one there in the store. The store owner went out to the back and wherever it was, and he knew this is urgent. Immediately came out with what he needed. Even though he can't speak a word of Hungarian. And same thing Prabhupada says, when a person's in a house, it's burning down. So he knows, even though he doesn't know the language, he knows how to communicate when he needs help. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta also needed help to spread Krishna consciousness in the Western world. The fire was already in his heart. Therefore he defeated Srila Prabhupada. And Prabhupada immediately knew, this is my spiritual master. And then he gave him his order. This message is urgent. There's no time to become an independent nation. Take this Krishna consciousness and bring it to the West. That is what Srila Prabhupada, that's the spirit that Prabhupada imbibed. He prepared for it. And when he brought these books, he was thinking how to ignite an explosion in the West. And one by one, we're all getting particles of that explosion. When there's an explosion, these particles go everywhere. And Prabhupada's explosion spread these particles first to all over the West. And his message was heard. He says, even though improperly composed, if it is an honest effort to spread this message, even though improperly composed, it will be heard by people in general in society. And it will create a revolution in the hearts of a misguided civilization. That's Prabhupada. Prabhupada gave us Mahaprabhu's Sankirtana mission. And he ignited that mission in the hearts of his followers through his books. This is what happened. Did it stop? No. Fire is still going. For those who remember where the spark came from and how it was ignited in Prabhupada's heart. Those who really understood what Prabhupada came to give. And those who continue to understand what Prabhupada came to give. He came to give us the lotus feet of Krishna. He came to give us the lotus feet of Shri Radha Shyamasundar. He carried everything in his heart. And when he was preaching his Krishna consciousness, he was igniting a revolution. Fanning the spark. Right? First the spark of the explosion, and then Prabhupada comes to fan the spark. Just like when we sit in front of the wood stove, right? Sometimes the flame is not going appropriately. There's some embers on the bottom of the stove. And we don't want to have to go out and get the tinder, we don't want to have to get the newspaper, the cardboard, and everything else to start a fire again. The spark is there. Let's take advantage of the spark. So we try to put on whatever we have left on the fire and fan the spark. Prabhupada's spark of an explosion was entering into some... Oops. Excuse me. I'm not intending to spread out. was already spread everywhere. And so what did he do? He fanned the spark. He traveled all over the world. Why do you think we were willing to sit in the back of a box truck for 300 miles? In the middle of the summer. It was the middle of the summer, no joke. Only Rath Yatras took place in the middle of summer. Yeah. And the devotees were standing there in the back of the truck. Why? Because everybody wanted their spark fanned. Because just being in the presence of a pure devotee who is always igniting and fanning sparks is just, it's so wonderful. Because he knows how to fan the spark. That's what Prabhupada did. And he drove us wild. What can I say? He drove us mad. Should I?
The marathon.
Huh?
The marathon.
The marathon. That's right. There was a marathon. Forgive me, please. I always lose sight of the goal. So, the marathon. Where was I? Okay. First marathon, as we said, was in 1972. That was the first spontaneous marathon. And that, as I said, took place on the west coast of the United States.
Which has west coast.
West coast of the United States, Los Angeles. And when I visited the temple in 1972, started visiting the temple, I was visiting the temple because I had Bhagavad Gita as it is. In fact, in 1972, I purchased the Bhagavad Gita the Macmillan Bhagavad Gita as it is in a bookstore in Washington, D.C. Yeah, I was working at the time and looking for a book on yoga. I went to this bookstore, a very famous bookstore called Brentanos. They had a chain of them all over the place. I was looking for a book on yoga and I found the Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada's Gita, the Macmillan Gita, and I started looking at the paintings and saw a picture of a yogi sitting in meditation. And I became captivated by the picture. And I decided to purchase the book. I found out 20 years later that some devotee, a godbrother of mine named Damodar Das, had gone into that bookstore and he had just dropped the book, the Bhagavad Gita, in the bookshelf and left it there. It wasn't even part of the bookstore inventory. I mean, really. I mean, tell me Prabhupada wasn't picking out people. Prabhupada said these books are like torpedoes. You never know where they're going to land. And that's the spirit devotees had. We didn't know where they were going to land. So one devotee went into a bookstore, dropped it in the yoga section, and left it there and walked out. I purchased it. They had no reservations to charge me the price on the cover of the book. Even though it wasn't part of their inventory. And I took it home and started reading it every night. And then, of course, I won't go into all the history. But I brought that up because that's relevant to my participation in the marathon. Because I felt that it was Prabhupada's books that ignited something in me. And as much as it was very difficult for me, I felt some kind of sense of commitment or obligation that I should do something to help Prabhupada in this way. So I kind of had that there because of how my heart had somehow been exposed to Prabhupada's teachings and how I became attracted to associating with devotees. And by saying this, I'm sure everybody here has their own story. My story is not a unique story. Everybody has a story. And don't be afraid to tell it and share it with others. Because practically 99.99% of the time, it was because somebody came in contact with Prabhupada's books. It's proof. Prabhupada's still preaching. We should never think Prabhupada's not preaching. So many devotees have come because somehow or other, through associating with devotees, they come in contact with Prabhupada's books, and Prabhupada began fanning the spark. So every jiva has a story to tell. I don't have a unique story. But this is what Prabhupada did to me. This is how he fanned my spark. I didn't even meet a devotee. Because these were the years when people were saying, these people are brainwashed. You know, Prabhupada said, first they'll ridicule us, then they'll persecute us, and then they'll adore us. So in the early years, everyone was getting ridiculed. My parents were even ready to mortgage their house to get me deprogrammed. That's another story. I won't go there. But they didn't. I somehow stopped it in time. That's another story too. But that's not the purpose of this presentation. But people used to say, these Hare Krishnas are brainwashed. But I never met a devotee. I only got Prabhupada's book. And after I got Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita and read the whole Bhagavad Gita, I tried to find out where can I get another book. And I saw there was a Bhaktivedanta book trust. So I wrote to the Bhaktivedanta book trust. And I found out that they had Krishna book and the first canto, first volume of Srimad Bhagavatam. So I sent away for those books. I started reading them. So I was already finished by the time I met a devotee. I was already brainwashed. Nobody brainwashed me. I was already brainwashed. I was so brainwashed. But by the time I visited the first temple, I drove 70 miles to visit the temple. I sat in front of the temple, saw the sign, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. And I sat there for an hour, just looking at the sign, looking at the building. And I was thinking, I can't go in there. Because I know if I go in there, I'll never come out. I serious. I was so brainwashed. And I had to think, what's going to happen to my car? What's going to happen to my dog? What's going to happen to the house I'm living in? If I go in there, I'll probably never come out. So I drove back. True story. Completely true story, Maharaj. I'm not making this up. It's a completely true story. Prabhupada knows. He brainwashed me. And then, anyways, I made another effort and said, I gotta go back again. Nothing here either. Eventually I went back. And stayed. There was more I could tell, but let's get to the Prabhupada narrative. This is the spark that somehow Prabhupada found that didn't happen in 1972 when I was visiting the temple. But in 1973, when I finally moved into the temple, a little bit later on, our temple president had vision, how can we compete with what they did in the West? And one of the reasons why he got into that spirit, because one of the devotees who came to our temple, his name was Keshava Das. Actually, Keshava, he's a god brother who brought me to Krishna consciousness. He's the one that convinced me to, okay, when are you going to give up this, give up that, give up that? I had many attachments, and he saw that the last attachment I had a girlfriend, a guitar, and a dog. And the last attachment I had was the dog. So he told me, you should go to New Vrindavan. They have many dogs there. They'll let you keep your dog. That's another story. I won't go there. So he's the one that really, he finished me. He was the final blow. And I moved in 1973. And because he had been there at the temple, he kind of stirred, and he was one of the first distributors in San Francisco who went out with my godbrother Buddhimanta to distribute big books. Yeah, this history is all there. There are two very, very well-known names, Keshava and Buddhimanta. They're the first devotees who went out with, I think, they might have been either Krishna books or Bhagavad Gitas and distributed the big books. Everybody was afraid of big books. So Keshava was in Boston for some time, and he was also the temple president in San Francisco at the time that my temple president, Tradas Prabhu, was also in San Francisco. So he got this spark gradually ignited in Trey Prabhu, and he said we should do a marathon like they did in California. Now, by that time, the only books that I had distributed and the only books we had were Back to Godhead magazines. Actually, the only books we had for mass distribution was Back to Godhead and Krishna, the Reservoir of Pleasure. We had cases and cases and cases of Back to Godheads and reservoirs, Krishna, the Reservoir of Pleasure. And I had previously been sent out to distribute this literature, but I wasn't, anyways, that's another old story. I want to try to keep myself as much as possible out of this, if I can. But I'm just trying to get to the point about sparks and explosions. Because there was a spark in me, but there were sparks in everybody else in the temple. And we knew nothing about distributing books. Nothing. Literally nothing. The only thing I had from time to time was tears. And they were not tears of compassion. They were were tears because it was so hard, so hard for me to approach people. People would feel sorry for me. Try this, try this. And many of us were not very successful in book distribution. We'd come back from a day on Back to Godhead magazines, and we'd come back with 50 cents or $1. So we would think it was a good day. Truth. Nothing made up here. This is the truth. We knew nothing. Keshava had already left. He left the temple and went off to another place to begin fanning sparks. And we were left to ourselves, to figure out how to get books up. So somebody, I can't remember who it was, came up with an idea. They used these little cans for collecting donations. And on the cans, we had a label. And the label said, "Don't waste human life." And a big sign that said, "Give." And on the bottom of the can it said, "To the Hare Krishna movement." We had to try something. We had that was what we did. We had to compete somehow with the West Coast. We didn't know anything about distributed books. So we came up with this idea to go out with cans and stand in front of grocery stores and parking lots. And as people were coming out, we'd show them the can. And the only books we had that in 73, we had no Back to Godheads. We had no Krishnas or Reservoir of Pleasure. The only books that we had for distribution was a book that you might not have ever heard of. The BBT had published a book called Lord Chaitanya in 5 Features. And it was Adi Leela, Chapter 7 of Chaitanya Charitamrita. Has this been repeated and been produced? No? Yeah, that's all we had. Lord Chaitanya in 5 Features. It was Adi Leela, Chapter 7, Chaitanya Charitamrita. It was just called Lord Chaitanya in 5 Features. And had a picture of Lord Chaitanya sitting in a place, in the filthy place, at the meeting of when he was effulgent, like millions of moons before Prakashananda Saraswati. Yeah, and we had boxes and boxes and boxes filled of Lord Chaitanya in 5 Features. And we had to figure out how to introduce Lord Chaitanya in 5 Features with an effulgent God sitting with a stick and so the housewives coming out doing their Christmas shopping. And that was a marathon. And Prabhupada, I can't remember what year it was. No, that was 1975. That was 1975. It was a different time. But Prabhupada somehow induced us to, that everybody would go out. I don't know if it was a direct instruction of Prabhupada or if it was by the temple president, but I was out. And we went, devotees went different places all throughout the area, and we rented an apartment, and we would have no morning programs except we'd read a little bit together, cook prasadam. I remember even when I was a Sankirtana leader living in a van, I used to cook breakfast on a little camp stove and give Bhagavatam class at the same time. It was just, right? You ever do this, Maharaj? Anyways, that's how we used to do it. That was after we would break the ice in the river to take our baths. And the only thing we had was for heating was a stove for cooking our food for the day, actually. Yeah, because that was the only prasadam we would have for day was in the morning, and the whole day was distributing books. And our lunch was peanuts and raisins. I'm serious. We did this for years. You can imagine eating peanuts and raisins for lunch every day, and then in the morning we would have frozen vegetables with with cream cheese, and butter. I put it in a pot with a little spice, coriander and turmeric and cumin. Stir, and give Bhagavatam class. Well, somebody else would heat up the milk to pour in the granola that we had also for breakfast. So, and that was how we eat for breakfast. I guess breakfast and lunch. And then in the afternoon, we'd have in our box of books, we'd have peanuts and raisins. I'm not suggesting you try to follow this. But when you're driven mad, you do crazy things. And that's how mad we were. We were ready to do crazy things. I could give a whole class on the crazy things that we were ready to do. Plenty of things we did. Breaking into college dormitories. Anyways, I'll stop there. But so this was the 1973 marathon where devotees with Lord Chaitanya in 5 features and cans asking people to not waste their life and give to the Hare Krishna movement. Until I found out it didn't work so well. What's this for? Please help. Nobody told us what to do. Just distribute these books and get donations for them. So we turned it, please help. Holding up these. I had a godbrother. He was a very, very dedicated book distributor. He became a very dedicated book distributor. He used to go out, after we really became fanatics. He used to go out 365 days a year. He would never miss a day. And distribute books in a wheelchair. He didn't have a foot. He lost it when he was a teenager in a motorcycle accident. So he would go out every day and in a wheelchair and distribute books to people. And during one marathon, he went to this big department store and he had this can, "Don't waste human life, give to the Hare Krishna movement." And he had been working so hard that he fell asleep. And he had his foot, because he had to keep his foot elevated. And when he woke up, it was a huge can, and it was completely full. Of course, we weren't ready to go out in wheelchairs.
That's not you.
We weren't ready to go out in wheelchairs. But actually, once I did go out in a wheelchair. I had torn the ligament in my knee, and I couldn't walk. And my temple president said, "You're the Sankirtana leader." So I said, "What's that mean?" He said, "It means you have to lead." I said, "But I can't walk." And then he reminded me of my godbrother. He said, "He used to go out in a wheelchair. You should go out in a wheelchair." And I said, "No, I can't surrender. I can't surrender." And I went back up to the room. And I came up later that day. And I came up to the temple president. And I said to him, "Can I have a check?" A check. To write out. He said, "What do you need a check for?" And I said, "To rent a wheelchair." And he said, "I knew I could give this instruction to you and you would surrender." He said, "I wouldn't have tried to give it to anyone else." I was crazy. So I went on a wheelchair. And I went out to a parking lot and I started rolling up to people as they were getting out their cars. Anyways, it didn't last too long, but I tried. But this godbrother, he had a reason for using a wheelchair. So he would do very, very, very huge. And he wanted to prove that he wasn't doing huge because he was handicapped. So he started going out and doing the parking lots in a wheelchair. And he was somebody who'd really surrendered. He would go from car to car to car to car, and the whole day he would just approach people, give them books and ask them for donations. Hold up the can, don't waste human life, give to the Hare Krishna movement. And he was an inspiration for many of us. We realized this is what it means to surrender. So we had a very good example of somebody who really knew the meaning of surrender. So at least we could stand in front of grocery stores and distribute Lord Chaitanya in 5 features. So that's what we did. Every day, we'd have our breakfast in the morning, our peanuts and raisins in the afternoon, and we'd stand out either at the front of the stores or the parking lots from 9 in the morning till 9 in the evening. We would get out when they opened and we would leave when they closed. And that was our December marathon in 1973. And we did very well. Everybody, there weren't that many devotees in the temple. I'd say there was probably about 20, 25 devotees in the temple. Maximum. There was no congregation in those days. Householders even lived in the temple. Very few householders lived outside the temple. So the householders were also taking part. And that was a 1973 marathon. I mean, I have stories about the 1974 and 1975. How things really started going. And how Prabhupada really fanned the spark. And the one thing that really got me going was in 1975. Prabhupada made a statement. Can't remember where it was. And whenever Prabhupada made statements in those years, it would just go everywhere. even because the recordings of Prabhupada's lectures, a recording would be made, and then devotee would try to make duplicates. They had this cassette duplicating machine that they would make duplicates and send it out to the temple presidents. So the temple president would get a duplicate of a talk that Prabhupada gave, and then he'd play it for the devotees sometimes he would just listen to it. But back then the only thing that we had for fast dissemination was a telefax machine, I think, or a telephone, or we had our mail. That's how we got our communications. So Prabhupada, I was distributing Prabhupada's books, and Prabhupada had made a statement. I was a traveling Sankirtana leader, and Prabhupada made a statement somewhere that somehow it got to me. And he said that the devotees who travel in vans and distribute my books get extra special mercy. And I got that from, I can't remember how, I wasn't traveling, I wasn't at the temple at the time. I used to have to call in to speak to the temple president. And he told me that Prabhupada had just said that. And I came back, we were just 3 of us traveling in a van that time. And we had a class discussing what's mercy. And we all understood mercy. Prabhupada's giving out so much mercy because we had this experience of getting mercy from Prabhupada. It's just no other place it could be coming from. When you make that kind of a sacrifice, 10, 12 hours a day, just thinking about Prabhupada and his pleasure, sometimes staying out till midnight, 2 o'clock in the morning on weekends, every day. Our Sunday feast was a fruit salad. And even when we had our Sunday feast at the campground, we'd first share the fruit salad with all the campers around us. And if there was enough left over, that would be our Sunday feast, and then we go out and distribute books. These are the kind of wild things Prabhupada drove us to do. And some mercy was there. And we discussed amongst ourselves, what's mercy? And then we understood Prabhupada's ready to give extra special mercy. And what is extra special mercy? We didn't know what extra special mercy was. But one thing we did know is we wanted to find out. And that was it. That was the fan. If Prabhupada was ready to give extra special mercy. And we all wanted to find out what it was. Prabhupada would give his classes, break down crying, how merciful his spiritual master is. It gives classes, we get these classes of Prabhupada in Los Angeles about book distribution. When he would say how my spiritual master has sent you to help me, and you would cry. Crazy! We'd go crazy. Prabhupada knew how to drive us crazy. That doesn't have to be a memory. It's something that has to be ever fresh. And that's what Prabhupada told us, that Krishna consciousness is ever fresh. It's ever fresh if we surrender. And that's what the Prabhupada Marathon is meant, to give us an ever fresh experience of surrender. And we'll be very eager to hear the stories devotees will share today of their surrender and how they're containers of Prabhupada's mercy. Is that okay? I'm sorry it took so long. Hare Krishna. All glories to Prabhupada.
Srila Niranjana Swami Maharaj.